Welcome to Relatively Weird, the podcast where a couple of cousins get together and talk about everything weird. I'm Kim.
I'm Jilli.
And we're going to try to do this because we don't have our dog babysitter today, so here we go.
He just wants to be a part of it.
I know, so apologies for the nail clacking, the crying.
And their nails are pretty short.
They are.
So
The bull snorting.
I'm gonna give you credit.
Oh, I don't do anything. It's him. It's magical. Alrighty. So what are we doing today?
So we have another unsolved mystery. But we haven't done one in a while, I don't think.
It's funny because my list is heavily unsolved mysteries coming up.
So my list is heavily like true crime.
Yeah.
And I'm like, crap. I think I was hoping... No, I'll try to mix it up. There's still some other stuff, but we'll get to it when we get to it.
Yeah. Whatever happens.
So I have done research on the case of the missing Beaumont children. Do you know about them?
Is this in Australia?
Yes.
This came up. I didn't dig into it, but yes, I've heard of it.
So it's not unlike... Well, we'll get into it. All right. Oh, jeez.
Jesus.
The whole thing goes down. So we are in January 26th, 1966 in Somerton Park, Adelaide, Australia.
Okay.
It is Australian Day, and the three Beaumont children, so there's Jane, who's 9, Arna, who's 7, and Grant, who is 4. So they're given permission by their parents to go to Glenelg Beach for the day. It's a 5-minute trip via bus from their house, and their mother, Nancy, gives Jane, the oldest, 8 shillings and 6 pence for lunch for all 3 of them, which is significant. This is why I broke it down. There is a reason why I broke it down.
For each of them, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
Jane was the responsible one. She was the oldest at 9. Now, I'm sure people who haven't heard about this story are being like, you're 9 and you're in charge of your 7 and 4-year-old. But that's kind of the reason why this is a big case, I think. So we'll get there. So she was pretty responsible. Jane had watched over her, siblings before. They've gone to the beach before. Actually, they had gone on this is the 26th. So they went on the 25th as well by themselves.
Okay.
She would do things like make sure, her little brother didn't go in too deep, all that sort of thing. They caught a bus at 10 a.m. and then they were expected back on the 1 p.m. bus. And everyone said it was like super, super hot that day. So they brought with them clothes, towels. Jane carried her money in a white purse. They never arrived back on their 1 p.m. bus. And after some time, their parents, Nancy and Jim, would eventually drive back to the beach and look for them. Neighbors and any of their friends said they hadn't seen them. Eventually that evening, the police were called, obviously. They did a search party at the beach. They searched the water as well as storm drains and manholes. And they said even they drained the boat haven, which I'd never heard of the term boat haven before, but I think it's just where you not the marina, but
where the boats hang out.
It's another term that we don't know. A number of witnesses would come forward saying they had seen the kids spending time with a 6-foot-tall, tan, blonde-haired guy. He looked like maybe in his mid-30s. And it seemed like the children were familiar with him. But Jane was very... she knew about stranger danger and all that stuff. But she's also 9.
Right.
Some said that they even saw the man helping Jane look for her purse that was supposedly stolen, that had all their money in it. So if her purse was stolen, they wouldn't be able to get back on the bus. They wouldn't be able to have lunch, any of that stuff. Now, the police were thinking whoever this guy was probably took the purse himself. And then was like, oh, darn. I guess I'll have to help you. So Wenzel's Bakery. So if you think about the beach, there's I don't know, I guess you would call it a boardwalk. sort of thing, with all sorts of shops, including a bakery, confirmed that Jane and the 2 other kids came in by themselves. They bought, like, they called them, like, pasties or pasties or whatever, but they were, like, cakes or, I don't know, some sort of pastry. And then a meat pie, which her mother said that, like, none of them liked meat pies. I mean, I don't know, what kind of kid... Like, yay, a meat pie.
Yeah, you're spending your money on meat.
So they assumed that they bought it for the man because she had a £1 note that she paid with. Now remember, her purse was gone and her mother only gave her, like, coins. So where the hell are you getting this £1 note? And also, I guess, I don't know what the equivalent would be today, but it's like a big deal. If you're a kid and you have a £1 note, it's a big deal. At least in 1966.
Yeah.
Nancy would remember Arna making a comment about Jane having gotten a boyfriend at the beach the day before. She was just thinking, like, oh, it's just some kid they met at the beach or whatever.
Right. Why would you ever think it was a 30-year-old man?
No. The kids were seen walking away from the beach with the man, and I guess even their mail carrier had seen... I don't know. I don't know how big Adelaide is, but at least where they lived, it seemed like everyone was familiar with each other, or at least, you know, same faces. Maybe you don't know their name, but they obviously knew their mail carrier person. Yeah, so that was around noontime. So years would pass with no solid leads on who took them. In 1968, Jim and Nancy would receive 2 letters meant to be from Jane. So Jane would have been, what was she, 9? Like 11?
Yeah.
Saying that the kids were happy living with the man who had taken them, and that the man would give them back if they were interested in meeting.
No.
Yeah. So obviously they went to the meeting spot. Nobody ever showed up. Now, of course, there was a detective around because, you know, you're not just going to hand me back my children and then, okay, goodbye. And then a second letter they got was also from this guy who was like, we knew the police were there and we didn't want to come meet you. In 1992, forensic evidence traced this letter back to a man who had written these as like a prank.
Yeah.
Because he was like 17 at the time.
Okay. Old enough to know that's shitty.
Yeah.
Gross.
You'll see in one of my sources, this was like a semi, like, you know those special edition news? It's not quite a documentary, but it's like a news thing.
Yeah.
It was their 7 News, whatever their 7 News is. That they were just like, they had, it seemed like they had a lot of people just wanting to be a part of it. Because the thing that made this case unique was that 3 of them disappeared instead of just like 1 kid. Like, how do you get 3 kids? How do you get 3 kids to do anything, really? Like,
yes, right.
Especially if it's like something they don't want to do, or if it's something...
And the middle one was 7?
Yeah.
You said? Okay.
Yeah.
So still, like, I could see if you convince the older one, she would convince the 4-year-old.
Yeah.
But you could still see a 7-year-old would be old enough to be like, I don't like this.
I know, but that's kind of why this case is so tragic, at least to Australia. Like, I don't know. I mean, my mom was born in 64, so she would have only been 2. But, you know, I think she talks about stuff like, we just went out. I mean, I'm sure they were told, like, don't go with any strangers, but, like, come on. I mean, you see people on the street, they ask you questions, whatever, you answer them. Especially if they're trying to be, like, helpful. If you lose your money, you're like, I need an adult to help me.
Right, now I don't know what to do. Exactly.
Yeah. So there were a few suspects. I will list some of the ones that they don't... All right, I'll just tell you.
Was the mailman one of them?
No, I don't know.
Interesting.
Throughout the years, there would be a few. We'll start with Derek Ernest Percy. Just as an aside, have you ever noticed that people name killers like after like their 3? Is that just because to like single them out between
name.
like?
I don't know.
Because I'm sitting here doing research and I'm like, Derek Ernest Percy. Okay.
I know, and I feel like there was another podcast that said something like killers always have 3 names. No, okay. A lot of
Most
us always
people
have
have,
3
yeah.
names. But I think the media uses them all for some reason. And I don't know.
Maybe just to, like,
I
if
don't know
there's
why.
someone named, like, I don't know, John Smith, you can't
True.
be like, you know, that killer John Smith, or like, which Derek Ernest Percy. Who's named Derek Percy?
I know, that's a pretty...
Anyways, so Derek was living in Adelaide at the time of their disappearance. The police thought that this wasn't just like a one-time thing. They were thinking it was someone with an MO. They would do it again. Derek was incarcerated for a murder of a 12-year-old in 1969. So they were like, well, maybe. But Derek was only 17 years old at the time, though. So it didn't really seem to fit this, like, 30-year-old's stranger guy.
And that's a big... I could see somebody experienced taking 3 kids, but on Australia Day at the beach on a really hot day, if you're a kidnapper, there had to have been so many opportunities to steal single children.
Yeah. But it seemed like they definitely narrowed in on these kids because
Right.
it seemed like he had talked to them the day before.
So I definitely don't think, like, an inexperienced 17-year-old would try to take 3 children.
No. I mean, I didn't really go into too much depth with a lot of these. There is one guy that, okay, maybe it's a bias. Maybe it's my bias. Maybe it's everybody's bias, but I'll get to him. Arthur Stanley Brown. In 1998, he was charged with the kidnapping of a 7- and 5-year-old back in 1970. And he actually does really look similar to the sketch. Remind me to look for those two, because I've noticed that I've said things like, we'll put it on Instagram, and then I'm like, oh crap, we never put it on Instagram. Because we record all these a lot of the time in advance to when they come out. And Kim, luckily for me, does the editing. So I forget. But anyway, Arthur was also 86 at the time of his arrest, and he had Alzheimer's, so they couldn't, he legitimately was like, I don't know, I don't remember.
So wait, how did they get him for the
I didn't
DNA,
go into depth
maybe?
about
Okay.
it.
I suppose 1998, maybe they could have gone back if they had
Yeah, I don't even know. I think
prior DNA.
I feel like the 7 and the 5-year-old were both girls.
Okay. I mean, so far, the 2 are pretty shitty human beings to begin with, but...
So, Bevan Spencer von Einem. Einem.
I don't know.
Almost looks like Eminem from afar. He kidnapped a 15-year-old boy in 1984. So, like I said, the police were like, we didn't catch them in 1966, so maybe this person was doing lots of kidnapping. The informant is...
Filling my days with kidnapping.
Yeah, well, it's like, obviously these people have a problem.
Yes.
An informant named Mr. B said that Bevan bragged about abducting 3 kids from the beach and performing brilliant surgery on them. He said that he connected their bodies and that they died in the process, and then he threw their bodies in the woods. But he was only 19 at the time in 1966. And I also feel like, you know how you think, I don't know, some killers are like, yeah, that was totally me, and then it wasn't, but they've killed other people, and you're like, so you're just like padding your serial killer resume? Like, it's so weird.
I mean, have you heard of Henry Lee Lucas?
No.
Maybe I'll have to do a show on him. He's had documentaries and stuff, but that was his deal. Like he would take responsibility. He fucked up a lot of people's cases because he just said, "Yeah, it was me."
Did he kill anyone, or was he just like?
I think so.
No one
like
knows for
one
sure.
or two, but he didn't. Anyway, I'll save that for the But and you're like, if it was such a brilliant surgery, why did they die?
Why did they die? Yeah. Okay, so we have arrived at Harry Phipps.
He doesn't have a third name?
He does not. I didn't even notice
Oh my
that.
god, he couldn't have done it then.
So, well, I suppose we can decide. Honestly, I mean, if I look back at Arthur Stanley Brown, he could have I don't know. I mean, he could have. But there was... Anyway, we'll get to it. Harry was a millionaire factory owner. Now, the factory made some sort of car part. It said, like, car strings or something.
Oh.
I don't know what that means. But the main points are he owned a factory and he had a lot of money.
Okay.
He lived on the beach where the kids went missing. He was in his 40s at the time. So he had one son, Hayden, who would talk to the police later and confirm that he had seen the kids in his yard that day. So it seemed like Hayden was...
Oh.
I don't know if they had like a tree house. He was not in the house, but he saw 3 children, according to him, go into the house. Hayden said that Harry was a pedophile. He would abuse him when he was younger.
Okay.
Right up until he was 14. He said his father... So at the time, I don't know when Australia banned guns, but his father had a pistol that he carried and then would, like, shoot randomly around their property.
Great.
So one time Hayden discovered that his grandmother, and I think she was the one that told him, his grandmother used to dress Harry, his father, in satin dresses when he was younger.
Okay.
Now, caveat, Harry liked to dress in satin dresses when he got older.
Yeah.
The documentary that mentioned this, that I used for my research, was in, like, 2018.
Okay.
So I don't think that it wasn't that long ago, but I think we're newly coming up on, like, it's okay to dress how you want to dress. Just because you are not in the quote-unquote norm, the gender norm of dressing the way you want to dress, it does not make you a pedophile, necessarily, and it does not make you a serial killer.
No, but you're right. That a lot of documentaries I've seen, older ones, God forbid, they have a history of dressing.
Right.
The wrong, quote-unquote, wrong gender is always, like, a point that they make.
But I do think, because it's 1966, you can't do that when you're a guy. You can't dress in a satin dress.
Now, would he go out?
So, I'll tell you something. Well, we'll get to it, because I don't know. I don't know for sure. But he did take his dresses out of the house.
Okay.
So, I don't know if he, like, went somewhere, or if there was, like, an underground, like, hangout for people. So, there is a book titled The Satin Man that I will get to in a moment, but Hayden would say that when he heard the swish of the satin, like, down the hall, he knew his dad was coming to, like, abuse him. Yeah. Hayden seemed like he had a lot of issues. He died before his mother did. I did not look into, like, his own personal life, but he seemed pretty obviously damaged by the stuff that his dad had done to him. And then obviously he's a prominent, wealthy guy who dressed normally, at least at work. So, normally by 1966 standards anyway. And then, yes, his mother also knew he was being abused. And then she said that he stopped when Hayden was 14 because I think at one point Hayden just, like, fought back and he was like, all right, well, that's done with.
It's too hard now, I guess. Gross.
So Hayden was 15 at the time of 1966, which is also like, okay, so it's been like, right,
yeah.
And he's may have been looking for somebody else to abuse. An unnamed woman had also come forward in the documentary. They don't show her face, but she has talked about, she knew Harry. I think the people around the town knew, or at least knew of him because he was wealthy. And she would see him just around town. One day, she was coming back from her friend's house, and Harry stopped her and talked to her, and she was like, he was in a nice pants, nice shirt, and he was clean, and then took her away from the street and raped her. She said after the assault, he blamed her for making, like, his clothes dirty. Like, it wasn't his fault at all. Like,
Oh, right.
And she said she never told her family, especially her dad, because she thought they would blame her for what happened.
And the fact that she's in a documentary 50 years later.
Right.
and still can't. Ugh, that's just awful.
I know.
That's so awful.
So on the day that the children went missing, Hayden said by the time he went in the house, the door had been left open. So he was like, okay, the kids left. Now he probably thought, okay, something terrible happened. They left. Happened to me. He said that he heard gunshots. 4 to be exact is what he said. Now, I believe that this interview took place in like the 90s. So it was like way, way after the fact. But the gunshots weren't abnormal because his dad was just firing his pistol. Yes. Hayden said that he saw Harry loading, now this is where the dresses come in, surfboard covers into his trunk. But he was like, he puts his satin dresses in the surfboard covers. So he was like, all right, I don't know. He's taking his, wherever you take your satin dresses. In 2013, David and Robin Harkin would tell police that they had been, I was going to say former employees, but they weren't really. They were just kids looking for like an odd job to earn money.
Okay, yeah.
So in 1966, so Australia Day was like a long weekend. He would tell them, so they were 15 and 17 at the time, he would tell them that he needed a hole dug behind his factory, 2 yards long, 1 yard wide, and then about like their height. So I don't know, I'm guessing under 6 feet, but I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
5'11", I don't know. However tall 17-year-old kids are. This needed to be done before Monday of that week. So factory's clear, no one's seeing them. They said he would just like come by and be like, no, it needs to be like this, it needs to be a little more like that, and then until they were done. He each gave them a £1 note for the job. Now
that seems cheap, if you ask
well,
me.
But in 1966, all right.
I guess $1 to dig a 6-foot deep grave.
I mean,
well,
I
sorry,
you could buy,
is
like,
it a grave?
Well, right, we don't know. The property was excavated twice, and no bodies had ever been found. However, the documentary that I watched, so the last time they excavated it was 2018. But they had said that the layout was now different. Like, the landscape had changed since, obviously, it wasn't his at the time in 2018. And I don't know. How long do bones, if that was what it was, how long do they last? Especially if they're kids' bones, like, smaller than an adult's.
And if he had put anything with them.
Right. Dissolved them in some
like
way.
lime or whatever.
Harry would die in 2004. So, Stuart Mullins, who the book I mentioned, The Satin Man, Uncovering the Mystery of the Beaumont Children, he would visit Harry's second wife, Elizabeth. So, the mother of Hayden, she actually died kind of recently. She was in this documentary, but I think they said she had died like a few weeks after they had interviewed her.
Oh, jeez.
So, Elizabeth was his second wife. Stuart went to their house and he recalled seeing a white purse on like a shelf in their basement. Why they were in the basement, I don't know. Because I was sitting there thinking, I'm like, we're like, can I go just check out the basement?
You have a great house. Just take a tour.
And he asked Elizabeth where she got it. And she was like, oh, it's new. And then he remarked like, hey, you know that Jane had a purse like that. And then she said, hey, I think it's time for you to go. Now, I don't know if that's just like, she's had to deal with things that were like, your husband did it, your husband did this, your husband did that. Or if she knew and she was just like, look, he's gone.
Right.
What are we going to do?
Yeah.
So that's what makes me, I'm like, I don't know. I mean, if she just got the purse, like, why are you putting it in your basement? Like a rack in your basement somewhere. Yeah. Why would you keep it at all, really?
New, that's true. Well,
people keep things, I suppose, if they... Let's just say he did do it. I suppose people keep mementos of things they've done.
Yeah. And then at that point, if you don't want somebody to find it, you're probably thinking, I'll just hold on to it rather than try to dispose of it.
When you burn it, though, no one's going to be like, this is a burnt purse.
What is it made out of?
Oh, I don't know. I would imagine like faux leather or something. I mean, they obviously it was like a dramatization, so it looked like a fake leather purse. But and the aftermath is that Jim and Nancy had stayed in their house for years, hoping their kids would come back. Nancy left the kids' rooms the way they were.
Oh, jeez.
And then in the 1980s, they would eventually get divorced and sell the house. And they're now both gone. Nancy was a little bit earlier than Jim. I think Jim just recently passed. The case is still open.
Oh, wow.
There's a $1 million reward for the whereabouts of the Beaumont children, but I guess, I don't know if it's, they just vowed they would never close a case. Like, obviously, as more time goes on, more people are dying, you can't get the answers. But the reason I think this case was so big was that, at least in Australia, everybody was like, oh, yeah, just let your kids go to the beach. Like,
right.
You know, they're around adults. If they get hurt, someone will help them and whatever. But, I mean, obviously now, when I said Jane was 9 and she was the oldest, you're like, wait, a 9-year-old, you know, takes their siblings out to the beach.
These days, people don't want 9-year-olds playing in the front yard by themselves.
No. And obviously there was no cell phones, you know, any kind of that stuff.
No way to know. That's just, oh, God.
But they had done it before.
I know.
And there were 3 of them.
Time.
But that's why people are like, this was like the first of, obviously not the last of his kind, but one of the first big wake-up calls that you're like, no, your kids aren't safe. Like, people ruin it, you know?
Yes.
And of course there was 3 of them, like I said. You're kidnapping 3 kids. One of them was 4. He wouldn't be like, you're not my mom, or you're not my dad. Like, it's just... So it's never been solved, and I know this was a quick one, but yeah.
It's just... And this is the tricky thing, because like I said, I'm researching a bunch of unsolved stories right now. And it does feel, as you're doing it, you're like, oh, God, it just feels so unfinished.
Yeah.
And just this lack of, you'll never know.
And the parents will never know, yeah.
To lose all 3 children in one afternoon, and, right, like you said, nobody was paying enough attention to notice any, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, discomfort on any of the kids' faces, or like, it's just so, or not that they felt was noteworthy.
Well, they said that it seemed like they knew him, which they probably did. They probably at least, you know, like I can remember, you know, different neighbors that knew my parents that were like, oh, hey, you know, you're out with your friends and they're like, oh, you guys, you know, like truly being neighborly.
Yes. Yeah.
Of course you always have to watch out for that, but when you're a kid, you're like, oh, I guess, you know, my mom or my dad know you, so whatever. Or if you're extremely helpful, like, oh my God, you guys lost your money, like, oh yeah, if you just go get me a meat pie and you guys can get whatever you want. And, you know, like the police were saying, they probably went in there by themselves because the bakery would have known whoever it was. And then the only people they had to go on were the people on the beach that were approached by him and the kids about the missing purse. But, you know, it's like...
So that's the only thing that strikes me as maybe... So this guy's a millionaire, whatever.
Well, one of the suspects was. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the only thing that I'm hung up on about that is, don't you think somebody would have said...
Oh, that's Harry.
That they were with Harry, specifically.
Yeah, especially if he lived around there.
Yeah.
Right. That's why I said, like, I don't know. I mean, Arthur Stanley Brown could have.
Feasible.
I mean, he kidnapped a 7 and a 5-year-old. That's 2 kids in 1970.
And you think how perfect to be like, you guys lost your money. Oh, geez, I gave you my last $1 for the meat pie.
Right.
Well, I can't give you money for the bus, but I can drive you home.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's true.
Would be such an easy...
Yeah, because have you ever seen... It's not funny, but it's interesting. Some guy on TikTok will be like, is that your kid? And they'll be like, yeah, it is. And he's like, okay, because he's got like a dog with him, and he's like, do you mind if I do like an experiment? And he'll go up to them and be like, hey, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, look, I have a puppy. And he does the whole thing. And he's like, do you want to go? I have their siblings. Do you want to go see them? And they're like, yeah. And he's like, because he'll talk to parents and he'll be like, have you talked to them about like stranger danger? And they're like, oh, yeah, they would never go with you. And he's like, can I try? And he does. And they go with him. And it's because kids are also suggestible. Like, it's just their nature. When you're in school and an adult says to do something, you have to do it.
Yes.
You are conditioned to do the thing that the adult says. And even adults can get tricked by other adults by, like, oh, yeah, like, come on with me. Like, people have a way of selling something, either themselves, their charm, whatever it is.
Well, and when you're teaching anybody something, and I hate to liken it to teaching dogs, but when we're training dogs, there's a lot about context. And you can perfect something in one context. So if you are continuously saying to your child, your kid, hey, if some stranger comes up to you, okay, they know that answer. They are conditioned to answer that question. But now, completely out of context, a stranger actually does come up to them. It's a totally different scenario. Right. To expect them to know that the answer is the same is tricky.
Would they label that person as a stranger? Well, I met him yesterday, nothing happened.
Right.
It's really interesting because you don't know.
Right.
I mean, if you think about it, how many of us like know our neighbors? Like really know our neighbors? I know their names.
Yeah, not at all.
But, if you have kids and you're like, oh, that's just, Harry over there, like, I mean, it could have been their neighbor. Who knows? We don't. Yeah.
And if he's saying, oh, I have a son, he has a tree house, like whatever.
Right, yeah.
So I think it's one thing to...
You could be like, it's so hot out here.
Right.
I have a pool, blah, blah, blah. Like,
You know what I'm seeing a lot of parents do, too, on TikTok? And somehow I've ended up on parent TikTok
Me
here
too.
and there. Which is like...
I think it just has to do with age.
Yeah, probably. But they're saying, like, I'm teaching my kids to say no to adults sometimes. Like, so if a family member says to you, come on, give me a hug, and you don't want to, you don't have to.
But that's so hard. Like, even thinking about that.
It's uncomfortable.
It's really uncomfortable because in a way you kind of are giving them mixed messages because you're like, well, don't be rude. Go give them a hug. Yep. And you're like, oh, this man's helping you find your money. Like, don't be rude. Go get him a meat pie. And yeah. And they're so good at it. All these people that have managed to kidnap kids, it's not just that they, wrap their arms around them and take them away screaming. Like, you can't.
Right. Somebody did this in front of thousands and thousands of people.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's so interesting. I was like, I wonder, because it is a famous case. And I was wondering if you knew about it.
Oh, it's so fun. Like, just the other day.
Really?
It came up. Yeah. And I was thinking about it, but then I was like, I don't know. I don't know. I think different cases speak to you for different reasons. Yeah. And that's part of what's good about this, is that you and I tend to have different things pull at our brains, I guess.
Well, I was wondering why, because, when you're searching for topics, you're like, what's a weird topic I can talk about? And they're like, what about this one? And I'm like, well, what's different? And I really did have to be like, how come this keeps coming up? And other podcasts have done, but it's because of the timing and then how many kids actually went missing. And that nothing has ever been found or solved since, 1966, and it probably won't be.
And it also sounds like Harry deserved to be in prison one way or another, and he never ended up there.
Wasn't a good guy, but
that's too bad.
Quick one, but
yeah,
interesting. I'm now interested of how you might have gone about this one.
I know it's different. It's well, and that's the other thing about, because I was thinking when I mentioned Henry Lee Lucas, I tend to, when I'm looking at stuff, shy away from stuff that has been done that I've heard on other podcasts.
Yeah.
Especially because we listen to podcasts that are similar to what we do. So I assume people. But you're right. There's a totally different, we bring different stuff to it. So
I think there's listeners that are like us, though. Because some of the people who listen to stuff that I listen to. Mm-hmm. And, I'm sure I've heard the name before.
Yeah.
But it doesn't ring like a bell. And
yeah.
I'm sure, true crime junkies are like, of course, like.
Yeah. That would be a long one. I'll have to start.
We gotta get some long ones in here.
I'll have to dig into that one. Because you're just, yeah. Well, I'll save it for that. But
okay.
It's a thinker. But yeah, no, this is, I like missing person cases because they make you think, and it's like a puzzle, but I hate them because you're also like, oh,
I think you'd be really good.
People.
You'd be good at like, those, how they have like groups of people.
Should I be a cyber sleuth?
Yeah. Not just that, but people who, they legitimately are like, hey, here's another one if you guys know anything. Mm-hmm. I think you'd be really good at that.
Oh, goodness. Honestly. I'd get wrapped up.
You would.
I'd be on Don't Fuck With Cats.
Yeah.
God. That documentary. Anyway. Well, yeah. So, apologies to everyone if you heard Abel crying in the background.
It's ambient.
He's just a little baby. And he can't handle being alone.
Anything but little.
I know, but he's a baby.
In his heart, he's a little.
Always, forever will be. So, okay, let's go stay out of this heat and plan a party and watch,
what was it?
A movie. We still haven't watched. We haven't watched Big Top Pee Wee. We haven't watched Queen of the Damned.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm in a bad movie mood. We'll figure it out. Okay, bye. Thanks for listening to Relatively Weird. If you like what you hear, make sure to leave us a review and follow us on your podcast player of choice. You can also find us at Relatively Weird the Pod on Instagram. If you have any stories you'd like us to talk about, send us an email at relatively weirdthepod@gmail.com. See you next week.